It is an incredible pleasure and privilege to be here and to recognize that. I'd like to thank the organizers, David and Jennifer Schaefer. I'd also like to thank the panelists, and we'll get to them in a second. And it's important for me to take a second to thank all of you. And it's not just about being polite that you're spending your time, but it's about all the other time that you spend. So many people here are really active in the environmental community, not only in Sarasota, but across the region, across Florida, and through the different interactions that you have professionally, really across the country and across the world. A lot of that is really about urban ecology, because we're certainly in an urban context right now. Our previous speaker in our video did an excellent job of framing some of the challenges and some of the opportunities in this area. And because we get to sit in the front, I think we've got a cool opportunity to talk about the work that we do in urban ecology. So that's kind of how I'd like to start us off, just with a couple of introductions. So we're going to go through and just say who we are, where we work, and then kind of as people involved in urban ecology as a field, what our best kind of professional day looks like. So I'll kick things off. I'm Brad Oberly, like Jennifer said. I'm an assistant professor of biology here at Ecology, and it's a fun kind of job. And I think the funnest kind of day is a day a lot like today. So got up early, carpooled into work. I spent my morning doing probably about one of the most useless things a college professor can do, which is lecturing college students about the use of cannabis. So it's an economic botany class. It had an academic purpose, but I probably could have learned more from the students in the classroom than they learned from me. At any rate, but what makes this day really special is the opportunity to meet with all of you in the community and meet with these really excellent panelists. It's a really fantastic opportunity that we have at New College right now and that I have in my particular gig. So that's who I am, where I work, and what I like to do. And I'd like to just go down the line with Dr. Jay Leveroni.
Thank you, Brad. I can hear myself, so that's good. And getting up here last, I guess I got the first seat that everybody seems to avoid in these panels. But nonetheless, before I tell you what I'm doing currently in my current position, real briefly, my career, the largest part of my career was spent as a research scientist at Mote Marine Laboratory, like so many of my colleagues around here. And it was as a benthic ecologist and as a shellfish ecologist. And the previous video, all that information is very familiar to me. Kurt Hemmel helped supply lots of the shellfish that I used in a lot of my shellfish research. And so that's, I would consider my area of expertise. That allowed me to apply for and get the position as the staff scientist for the Sarasota Bay Estuary Program 10 years ago, Mark. So it's been a while. And in this particular position, it's more of a management role, and I just got to oversee lots of projects that are typically conducted by local professionals who are far more knowledgeable about the issues that they are working on with me than I am. So what I've learned in all my experience is just how little I know about a lot. But knowing that there are people in this community that together, we have the collective intelligence and experience to solve these problems, and some of the things we'll talk about today in this particular forum, I want to let everybody know that I rely on that collective expertise to accomplish the things that the program is tasked with doing. And my favorite day, I got to go back to those days at Mote when I was on the boat and underwater a lot. We were talking at lunch today, and I got an issue with this ear from time to time, and I got to pop it from now. Not from scuba diving, but from snorkeling in Sarasota Bay, just in 6 feet of water for 20 years or more. Many days, just surface to bottom. I wouldn't pass up those days, even the bad days on the water, for a good day in the office. So those are the days that I look like that are the most fun. And occasionally, one of my contractors will be going out in the field. I go, I think I need to go out and see what you're doing. So I'll take every opportunity I can to do that. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Jay.
Hello, my name is John Kiefer. I'm an environmental engineer, and I specialize in stream restoration design and stream protection planning. Most of my work is in Florida. I work for a large international consultancy called Wood, formerly known as Amec Foster Wheeler, name literally changed like this week. So I'm one of 40,000 employees in that company. And I have specialized, I'd say the latter 15 years of my career, very heavily on streams. And I work a lot in wetlands and with lakes and other water body types as well. A good day for me is really almost any time I'm on one of Florida's least impacted rivers like the Suwannee. Another good day for me would be working with people in the public, touring a system that's been radically altered, and collectively coming up with ways to effectively improve it. Any day I learn something about improving or protecting one of Florida's rivers, for me, is an exciting day. I have a t-shirt. Now, I work on rivers, right? So I have a t-shirt. My favorite t-shirt says, "A bad day on the river is better than a good day at work." And that just blows people's minds because they don't know how that applies to me. So that's what I'm all about.
Great. Hi, my name is Ryan Slesher. I'm a scientist in the Fisheries Ecology and Enhancement Program at Mote Marine Lab. The project that I really spend most of my time focusing on is using our hatchery-reared juvenile snook as ecological probes. So we try to use our enhancement activities in order to understand how these juvenile fishes utilize the different habitats that are available to them, and what that indicates in terms of habitat quality for some of our local systems, primarily our tidal creeks. One of the systems that we're working in most regularly is Philippi Creek, because there's a lot of different shoreline habitats available. It's one of the biggest systems here. It is the biggest coastal system here in coastal Sarasota. And I think that there's a lot of good things about Philippi Creek, and it actually makes one of my favorite parts of the day when I'm out there. The systems that we use, they're called passive integrated transponder antenna arrays. We have several of them on Philippi Creek, and when I get to go pull the data from those systems, it's just me, maybe one of my colleagues sitting in a little john boat, putting up the creek, looking at all the birds, the gators, the fish in the water. And when I get home that day, I got 10,000 pieces of data just by sitting on a boat. So that's a great time. Easiest data collection ever.
So great. It's cool to have you all here and have your different areas of expertise. The fact that everybody's got deep roots in the local area, but you also connect to systems that integrate with Sarasota Bay and also scientific communities that really have ramifications around the world. So a scientific concept that I think is really interesting and one that I'd like to kick off our discussion with is one that's about 15 years old. In 2003, ecologist Michael Rosenzweig was thinking about a big problem in ecology and one that's especially important in urban ecology. That problem is basically a problem of space. How do we have enough space to accommodate the incredible variety of species that have evolved on the planet, while at the same time accommodating all of the people, especially people who are concentrated in relatively urban areas? So for those kinds of problems, you often think about a lot of conflict, but what he pointed out in his book was the opportunity for what he called win-win ecology. So what he meant by win-win ecology are smart designs that benefit both people and natural systems, and in particularly benefit native species so that they can survive sustainably, not only for their own ability to avoid extinction, but also to contribute back to the ecological system that we all benefit from. So whether you know it or not, everybody's yard does a really good job of this. Some yards better than others. And with a lot of environmental professionals in the area, I'm interested to kick this off actually with a little bit of data collection. So I've got a community polling question that I'd like to bring up. So, and I'd like to ask everybody just to weigh in with what the most interesting native species is that you've seen in your yard. Apparently somebody saw a tarpon in their yard, which I think is kind of extraordinary, but
Maybe 50 years from now.
so, and a really fun thing about this for folks who are ecologically oriented, There's all kinds of data analysis that we could do on the size of these things, the numbers of them, where they all go together. And the other thing that I think is really cool about this is it's a great representation of our biological heritage in the area. So, and this is just from your yard, an area that you manage a lot. But a cool thing about our panelists, they've been involved in a lot of public projects and a lot of public spaces. So what I'd like to do is to kick off the conversation on our end, and feel free to keep on adding stuff, more data, more good. But I'd like to ask Jay first. What are some examples of projects that you've worked on which benefit both people and also natural systems?
Well, thank you, Brad. And what I'd like to do first off, based on what I've had the pleasure of observing during this symposium, is the session that was yesterday on land acquisition and conservation and land management. I know this is a special session on urban ecology, but from my perspective and just personal, and I'm sure a lot of people probably agree with it, the work that's going on in the watershed for large-scale land acquisition, like we said before, it is disturbed or devalued, if you will. The continued acquisition, preservation, and conservation of those lands would probably do far more in the overall benefit of animal migration, species migration, watershed function, and everything, than the types of things that we are probably doing in this particular session. Having said that, we have unique environments in which we're working, and it's obviously the built-out urban environment, and it has its challenges, unquestionably, and we can only do certain things in these systems. So one of the challenges is, we are limited in our ability to do the things we want to do with the constraints of spatial, temporal, and interaction with the urban setting. Having said that, I think that the win-win situation can be that even though we're in the urban setting, we have more eyes on the types of projects that we are doing, the types of work we are trying to achieve, and more public participation and more public interface with those projects than we might say by conserving the lands out east. So we have the opportunity to do the whatever project it might be. Ryan talked about stream restoration, and John as well, and I think a lot of our focus lately has been on that, looking to improve shorelines along these streams in particular, and engaging homeowners with the possibility of they could be involved in some of these restoration efforts. That's a win-win in the sense that we get the anticipated ecological benefits for the system in a variety of different reasons, and also continued public engagement, especially people who now have skin in the game, if you will, where they then become proponents to spread the word to their neighbors or others who have that opportunity as well. So I think even though we have constraints on what we can do in terms of designing the most optimum habitat project, we have the benefit of having, hopefully, the buy-in, if we do it right, from the residents in the area.
Great. Thank you, Jay. And I think it'll be cool to kick it to the stream system that you mentioned, where I know both John and Ryan have a ton of experience. So what does wildlife preservation mean for you, John, in the kind of places where you work? And have you come up with any cool examples of designs where something that works really good from the engineering point of view for people also works really good for the native species that occur there?
Oh, absolutely. I would say I center my design practice on trying to achieve that set of objectives. We want to create self-sustaining, self-organizing, urban ecosystem environments or habitats that not only benefit a fishery, but have very tangible benefits you can put market prices onto as well for society as a whole. And I think I have a confession to make. If you had asked me a few years ago if I'd be sitting on an urban environment renewal panel, I would have said, because what can you do in an urban environment compared to what you can do in rural settings with a much larger canvas to work upon? There's constraints in urban environments. And, but I had an epiphany a few years ago. One of the first times I was asked to actually take a close look at a canal alignment and determine what we could do in that alignment in an urban area. And I found much more than I ever thought was possible. In fact, I feel like we could completely rewild that corridor. We could attribute it with a meandering stream that fits its watershed, that provides pools and riffles just like a natural stream, that's stable just like a natural stream, that requires no maintenance just like a natural stream, provides tremendous fish habitat, habitat for wildlife in the floodplain that we would create from scratch, birds especially, but also mammals, reptiles. Tremendous wildlife value to doing this. When we look at the Philippi Creek watershed, there's about 100 linear miles of canals. There's enough right-of-way and approximately 95% of that length to build meandering streams with sufficient floodplain relief in the right-of-way so they function more like natural channels. When we do things like that, we not only benefit the fishery tremendously because our fishery is adapted to that kind of fluvial system. We add value in flood resiliency, tangible reductions in flood damage. We add value to stability. Right now, the Philippi Creek watershed produces about 3 times the normal sediment load that a forested watershed would produce. And most of that load comes from eroding canal banks. Natural channels produce much less load, so less sediment goes to the bay. We decrease maintenance activities. A lot of capital and energy is put into maintaining the canals, mowing them, patching them up. We increase water quality values. In fact, in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, stream restoration of the type we're talking about is credited as a best management practice for reducing nutrient loads to the bay. So we reduce pollution when we do this. We reduce harmful algal blooms. We increase property values. Economists have studied this. There's tangible numbers to put on this. We increase wetlands and bird habitat. We increase ecotourism potential. We increase the ability for local communities for their passive and active recreation along blueways and greenways. When we look at the cost benefit of doing these things, it's always very net positive to society as a whole. So there's ways we can benefit a fishery that provide benefits that blow away that single benefit we might have started out focusing on. And so there's tremendous potential for this.
And that's a cool place to bring in Ryan's expertise, because this is a fishery where he has collected all the data. So what are you seeing, Ryan?
Yeah, we're on Philippi Creek all the time, and I said it's great to be on the boat and monitoring our systems, but it's equally exciting pulling nets there, because I think the diversity of fish in the waters in our backyards is incredible. And when you see that catch, you see a diversity that most people don't ever know of. The types of gobies that are just right off your yard are just beautiful, awesome fish. Unfortunately, one of the issues in Philippine and a lot of our tidal creek systems is that they're becoming more and more hardened. And fisheries scientists have known for quite a while that hardened systems just don't support the diversity and the abundance of different fishes that more natural systems do. And one of the reasons is that, just take a simple vertical seawall, for example, hardened systems are much less complex than a natural system. I mean, compare a seawall to a mangrove. Mangroves have all sorts of complexity, little crevices, nooks and crannies where prey fish can hide, where fishes can hide, and their prey are also there. So they have protection from predators, and they have their food source. And that complex habitat really helps promote diversity in that sense. So this is a little bit about win-wins, and the impetus to some of our work is trying to find ways to have a win-win, not just for people, but for the fishes that we all care and love about too. And what our work is really showing that even if you had a hardened shoreline, a rip-wrapped seawall, when you have complex vegetation associated with that shoreline in some way, shape, or form, regardless of the wall, the fish will use it more. They seek that out. The fish that we release, we see more fish coming to sites that have that vegetation than any of the other ones. Actually, one with a seawall is one of our most popular visited sites by our juvenile snooks. So it's kind of a simple solution, but if you just provide that shoreline vegetation, the fish will come. And that vegetation strengthens the shoreline. It gives it a little bit more resiliency. And there's a lot of benefits to doing something as simple as just letting things grow.
So everything's good. Job's done. The solutions are obvious. Everybody wins. But I think an undercurrent in sort of all of the comments that we had here is that, unfortunately, there are certain situations where conflicts do come up. And for all the great species that people see in their yards, when you make decisions about what to do in the property that you own, sometimes there are winners and losers. And so it's important to pay that part of the process its due attention. So with that, I'd like to talk a little bit about trade-offs that show up in urban ecology, both at the scale of sort of individual property owners and at the scale where everyone here is working as researchers or as managers or as designers. So can we bring up the next audience question here? Because I think that this series of questions will sort of indicate what your preferences are like and some necessary trade-offs that go on. And so this one is related to the use of pesticides. So we've got a pretty strong preference in the room here for more pollinators, even if that also means more mosquitoes, which is certainly one kind of trade-off that happens. Interested to bring up the next one here as well. So we've got fewer invasive plants on one side and less herbicides on the other side. I totally should have worked something out with the folks in the booth to capture all these data. It'd be a nice little paper or a poster to do. Got it? Excellent. So this one's a little bit more mixed. I suppose the folks that have weighed in on this one are okay with a couple invasives here and there as long as it keeps some herbicides off of their property. And I think we have one more trade-off question that I'd like to address to everybody. So clearer views of open water or better coastal protection? All right, this might be something more about the sample of people that we have in the audience than the sample of people who own coastal property. Well, given that.
This is a big issue for us.
Well, I'm glad. I think that's a good spot for you to start with, John, about these kinds of trade-offs and how you value these alternative kinds of goods.
All right, so yeah, there frequently are trade-offs in priority and prioritizations that have to be made. So it's something I've had to give a lot of thought to over the course of my practice, which is how should you go about prioritizing things where you have conflicting or ideas or trade-offs involved with which alternative to select from. So probably because I'm an engineer, I decided that I really think that the great tiebreaker or hierarchy for prioritization is physics. So I want something that is intrinsically self-organizing, self-sustaining. So if we're comparing alternatives and one involves a lot of human intervention to sustain, I say that's the one you de-emphasize. And so if we look at canal settings, for example. I'll go back to Philippi because it's local. There's part of that canal network that can be best rewilded to stream conditions that I was talking about earlier, but there's parts of the network that can't support that kind of renewal. Instead, it would be better to put a wetland or a pond or just a shoreline planting along those areas because they don't have the right physics to support a meandering stream. So if we're talking about benefiting a fishery, there might be some idealized spacing between pools that we really can't sustain, but don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. We can make substantial improvements that are more self-sustaining, and I think that's the best overall mix. So what I like to say is, I really value the fishery, but I really only flirt with the fishes. I'm married to physics.
So I think someone who would describe the relationship a little differently, Ryan, what's your perspective?
Probably the other way around. Yeah, so some of the trade-offs, I mean, they're very common in fisheries. Anytime you have multiple user groups all trying to use the same resources and somebody wants something different out of it, it's going to be trade-offs. And in terms of fisheries, one of the big things is sustainability. You get these, in some of the big fishes that we usually target, you get these banner year classes, and they can really support a fishery for a really long time. But it's when those year classes aren't so great that you can kind of run into these conflicts, because we know what would work best for the fish: lower mortality. Lower mortality, the population's going to be larger, more sustainable and vibrant. But in order to actually do that, now you're affecting people. You're affecting livelihoods. And fortunately, as a scientist, I don't have to make that call to say, hey, for the benefit of the fish, you don't get to fish as much. That's a hard decision to make. So often, when those situations arise, sometimes the environment kind of takes one in the teeth, just to allow people to do their thing.
That's a cool point, and I'm glad that you mentioned that these trade-offs aren't necessarily just between stakeholders or between different kinds of goods that they might prioritize, but sometimes it's a timescale thing. If you manage for that one bumper harvest, there might be a cost to pay down the road. And Jay, you've been working in this setting for a while. How do you see those kinds of trade-offs? How have they really affected the work that you've tried to get done?
I think sometimes it's a matter of perception whether there are actually conflicts or trade-offs. And one of the things that, we haven't quite done our due diligence in getting to the public who ultimately are responsible for this particular issue would be our relationship with the mangroves. And there are several examples in our community where the community has embraced their mangrove trees, and they are trees, and they have managed them in such a way that they get the benefit of the mangroves by windowing the trees and maintaining their viewscape, which is obviously a high priority for coastal residents, and by maintaining the function of the trees, the habitat support, the sediment stabilization and stuff. So it's a perception. A lot of people don't ever get to that point because they want their mangroves hedged and nice and tidy and trim, and there are large communities to do that. So I'm not sure that if we could demonstrate to them that there are alternatives to the way that they are traditionally handling their mangroves locally, that we could tip the scale or at least shift the perception and ultimately the results of managing our mangroves to the benefit of everybody, where you might have thought that there's a conflict or trade-off, there necessarily doesn't have to be one.
And this might be a bit of a hot potato question, but if anybody's willing to grab it, I'd be interested in your take on it. A lot of the ways that we've been discussing dealing with these trade-offs involves engaging people in the community, people who are directly involved. But a big player in this is also policy, right? The kinds of policies that might constrain the palette of decisions that you have as a designer, or the ways that you can actually collect data. And I'd just be curious on anyone's take about how they feel policy might either cause conflict or ease conflict in the areas where you've really worked. Hot potato.
Well, I have one example of a project, the very first project that I was ever involved in, and that was the restoration of the North Lido Beach Park, which is a passive park, which historically was really trashed and lots of nefarious activities going on up there. If you lived here back in the day, it was really an ecological disaster. And thanks to the one particular officer with Sarasota City Police, who was also an environmentalist conservationist, he was really, I call him our guardian angel, who got the impetus to start doing the restoration of that project for many benefits, primarily ecological benefits. And it was a pretty major undertaking. And there's also North Lido Shore's residential area up there, so some very expensive homes and very powerful people in the neighborhood. But there's this one particular resident in particular who lived at the north end of the park. And he was a real thorn in the side of this project to the point where, how are we going to deal with this individual and accomplish this project? Fortunately, Officer Carr, Captain Carr, very articulate about the things we were doing and about the things this man essentially wanted the park for himself, and he wanted the benefit of it all, but he didn't want higher use and the like. But we had to go to the city commission and discuss with them what was going on in this particular situation, and they clearly saw the public benefit of this project. And it would have been a lot more difficult for me to go to the city commission and say, we've got an issue with this gentleman and how can we resolve it. But having somebody who works for the city, especially as a highly regarded captain, went to them and pretty much essentially squashed any opposition to the project for us. And so I think when you're working in an urban environment, there are going to be these public interests that may not go along with what you're trying to accomplish. And it does take political will to see the benefit of what you're doing. And even if it does upset a resident or two, that it's for the better good. We come across those kinds of things quite often in our restoration in the urban setting, because there's always some people who either don't see the value or they have their own personal stake at risk. And it is a delicate balance where we need public policy support to accomplish what we want to do.
Anybody else willing to grab that potato?
Well, I have not a specific example, but in terms of policy, a direction, at least in fisheries, that is going to be kind of an exciting one. They're kind of working with and flirting with ecosystem-based management. And maybe it's not necessarily the management at an ecosystem level, because that'll be really difficult to get to, and it's something to strive for. But in the meantime, it's really policies that allow for being adaptive management, having our policies change based on the conditions instead of holding to a rigid framework and not budging. So I think that's something to really keep in mind for policy and ways to improve and lessen conflicts, is being able to be adaptive to those types of things.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Ryan, because the natural systems are dynamic, people are dynamic, and policy should be dynamic to accommodate changes in preferences, changes in feedback that you're getting from the natural system, and then also just understanding the results of whatever kinds of activities that you're trying to plan out. And this is definitely getting towards, I think, the other main thing, that's something that everybody on the panel has already brought up, which is urban ecology is all about people. People are really what define any kind of ecological system as being an urban one, particularly places where we have more people compared to places where we would have less people. And whether they're engaging by stating preferences, they're engaging by maybe constraining what other people or natural systems can do, or benefiting from those natural systems that are around. People are always going to be part of the urban context. And so what I'd really like to hear about in a little bit more detail would be some examples of how you manage people. And I think it'd be cool to get your perspective, Ryan, as someone who does really technical work in a very urban environment. How do you decide whether to engage the public, and what kinds of projects do you do that you kind of keep under wraps, right, to prevent folks from lifting equipment or running away with samples?
Yeah, well, lifting equipment disappearing has happened in the past, but really, from my point of view, I'm of the mindset that the more you can engage the public and have them involved with the process, the better off you're going to be. They talked yesterday on some of the panels about, trust. If you have the public really participating in the process and you have that transparency, you're going to build a trust with them. And whatever the conclusions are from your study, they're going to be far more accepting of it because they're a part of the process from start to finish. And at Moat, we have to use volunteers for so much of our research. They're an integral part of that process. And being stakeholders really allows them to have a great deal more confidence with what we were suggesting based on that research. So the more we can get people involved in even just the nitty-gritty of everyday science, I think the better. But There are times where we have to kind of hide what we're doing as well. I don't really want to say hide, but when the results of our research can really be biased by that human component, because we don't want that in science. So for the fish we release, for example, they're tagged. We're trying to monitor what they do, including what their survival success is. But we use tags that are internal. You can't look at our tagged fish and tell it apart from an untagged fish, no matter how hard you try. And that's by design, because if we're looking at survival, we don't want our behavior to change the response. I don't want somebody to look and say, oh, this is one of those moat tagged fish. I'm going to let it go. We want you to behave the same way you would with any fish, whether it's ours or not, so that we can capture that effect in what we're trying to measure. So that's one reason we might hide what we're doing, because we don't want people to change their behavior based on what we're trying to do. The other thing might be a little bit of when research has a bit more risk for that reward. If you want to get people engaged, get them engaged in something that they can be really excited about. And if you're doing some work that's kind of new, you don't really know what to expect, you don't want to drum up a lot of excitement just to have that let down. Maybe it didn't work out the way it was supposed to. So in that kind of case, we might want to do the research first and then share with people, this is what it means. Let's do it some more. Now come and be involved.
So in kind of a follow-up question, so you've got your fish out representing moat, at least subtly, in the community. What's it like for you when you're out in the community? Like, do you wind up getting a lot of questions from people about what you're doing? And how do you find those interactions as an ecologist in an urban environment?
Yeah, people are interested in what's going on in their backyards. And we get it from the good and the bad. When we're out there, we get all sorts of great questions. People want to be aware. They want to know what's happening, and they want to be able to understand what it is that we're trying to do. What are we trying to solve? What can they do to help? So we get all sorts of great community interactions with people who are just honestly wanting a better backyard. They want better creeks. So those are great to have, but we get some negative interactions too. People, almost in a good way still, they're possessive of their creeks. They don't want to see people messing around. So sometimes when we're pulling nets, we get the, hey, what are you doing? Are you allowed to do that? Yeah, we're permitted, it's okay. So people are very passionate about some of those things, and it's just important to make sure that they get the right information when you're out there communicating with them, because then you can put those passions in a good direction.
And so, John, I'd like to throw that question to you now. When you're in the field, or when you're in your office, or when you're working with different clients, how do you wind up incorporating public perceptions into the decisions that you have to make professionally about urban ecology?
I think that's a given that it happens when you're working on urban ecology projects. It's in their bones. In fact, usually by the time a project is brought to me for our team to assist with, it's because somebody in the public wanted it to happen. And this is probably the most important thing I'm going to say today. Everybody in this room has the interest and the ability to make projects happen. I don't. I'm a consultant. I will design the project. I will make sure it works and meets your objectives. That's my job. I cannot lobby for those jobs to occur. I cannot approach politicians and ask for them to happen. You can. You should. Everything I've ever worked on is to your credit. People like you. So I encourage you to do so, to become informed about what to ask for and why you are asking for it. But ask. All right, so I do have a great story for a design that this will give you a sense of sometimes the way it goes for a designer. Right? You have to kind of, I learned early in my consulting career, you either have to have a very, very big ego so people can chew it to pieces, or none at all. And you have to be able to set it aside. And so you know, and occasionally clients do ask me to interact directly with the public. And I'm working with the public so that they can influence a better outcome, and I can educate them so that collectively we achieve that better outcome. Now, I'm a professional engineer and a PhD, right? So when people hear that someone like that's going to speak to them in a public meeting, their first thought is, oh, math. There's going to be math. And so I'm not going to disappoint you. We're going to do, so I'm going to give you an equation right now. All right? So this equation is professional engineer, right? PE plus PhD is equal to boring multiplied by long-winded. All right. So that's usually where I'm starting with an audience. And so you have to be self-aware. But all right, so the story I wanted to tell you is that I had this design. It's a demonstration project for rewilding a canal in Florida. One of the first where we're completely repatterning this thing, rebuilding not just the stream channel, but the floodplain. It's an exciting project. They're constructing today. I've been getting texts from the contractor. But we started planning this years ago, and the first design I came up with was would have been a 50-acre wetland benefit in addition to having a natural stream at a cost of about $500,000. And the project we ended up with, after public input, provided a 10-acre benefit for $1 million. So 20% of the benefit for twice the cost. Now, I'm going to tell you that I'm extremely happy with that outcome. So is my client, the Suwannee River Water Management District. So is the community. They're much happier with that outcome than they would have been with my otherwise scientifically and technologically very, very robust plan that we didn't implement. And I got asked one time in a lunchtime conversation after a public meeting about the 50-acre plan. My client asked me, and this is in North Florida, South Georgia kind of culture, right? So I got asked, hey John, you got to tell me, please, John, are you double dog sure that 50-acre plan will work? Double dog. And I said, yes, I am. I'm triple dog sure that plan will work. I've had some of the best numerical modelers work on the hydrology study. It's airtight. It'll work. But here's the issue. I advised my client, after getting the public feedback, to not do it. I said, we have to do something different because even though I'm double dog sure it'll work, the community doesn't view it that way. They view it as if I'm going to release a pack of wild rabid dogs into their community. Not double dog sure, something entirely different about dogs. So they just saw it as a dog. And it scared them. They thought it was going to make a flooding situation worse. And I won't get into the details as to why, but there was an underlying psychology there that we had to address. The community has to embrace the project for it to work. So we redesigned it in a way that their psychology flipped. They saw it as a benefit to flooding. And you know what the great irony of it is? It's flooding neutral. Both projects were flooding neutral. But it was the perception, the public perception. So I completely changed the design. But the thing is, it got built. And what got built has benefit-cost ratio very high. It's an outstanding project. Is it the best possible project we could have had just based on science? No. Just based on economics? No. Is it a great project? Absolutely. And because we took the community's perceptions into account, it got built. Otherwise, it wouldn't have gotten built.
And I can definitely identify with that. So we're busy this week at New College as students defend their baccalaureate exams. And a student that I've been working with in the environmental studies program was presenting her research on local food forests. And this was a project she got started a couple of years ago working with Marie Selby Botanical Gardens. And one of the interesting outcomes of her work, and my perspective on it, was totally technical, totally scientific. What are the different species that are present? What is their size? What's the diversity? Blah, blah, blah. The major conclusion was that if the people at the place didn't care, those trees wouldn't be there. And it gave me a little dose of humility as a natural scientist about the role that social sciences play in effective design and collaborating on really positive outcomes. And I have a feeling Jay has more experience than many of us in terms of public engagement. And so I'm kind of curious in your position and in your experience, how does that work really effectively, and maybe some cases where it doesn't?
Well, first of all, I have a PhD too, but my dad always told me, you're not a real doctor. So I take that with, that's very humbling as well. But as many of you, some of you who do know me, also have a sense of humor. And surprisingly, I'm a people person too. So starting with that, I get along with the people that are out there interested in these things. And I must say, the Sarasota Bay Estuary Program, along with its counterparts to the north and south, this is in our wheelhouse. This is the type of thing that I think that we have done remarkably well, if I may say so, from the director's leadership and our partners, that we have been able to do the types of urban related habitat restoration, working with Parks and Recreation on both counties and Swiftman and everybody in a partnership. We've demonstrated the ability to provide the public with some really wonderful natural lands. And certainly, with Charlie Hunsinger and the incredible work Manatee County's done with, Sarasota County Parks and Recreation, if we look at the natural areas, you can go all around the bay and out to the watershed, and in every particular instance, there's a natural area that people, and whether you're environmentally sensitive, aware, or just out for fresh air and a walk, these types of settings, provide you the opportunity to just refresh, to reinvigorate, to enjoy. And what we have learned is we're not going to put something in that the public doesn't want. We work with these communities. In fact, they come to us. Grassy Point on Anna Maria Island, Quick Point on the south of Longboat Key, several on Lido Key. All around the bay, we've worked with different partners and the citizens groups to design these types of projects for the benefit of the ecology and the benefit of the people. And it's just like next week, to engage the public, you got to get them dirty. And all these programs and all these relationships, the public is physically engaged in the projects in one way or another. And even next weekend with the seagrass survey, there's, over 100 folks are going to stick their head underwater in the bay, something I did my entire career at Moat. And that opens up a whole new world to people that otherwise just look at the water from the bridges or from the viewpoint. But when you stick your head underwater and look at these things, and not everything doesn't rush up and bite you, then it's a whole new world. It's a whole new world for them to really physically connect with and understand that there's, the successful ecological restoration of the bay itself occurs underwater. When you think about it, the oyster restoration that we don't have time to talk about, or the artificial reefs we built, or the other shellfish initiatives that, not only benefit commercial fisheries, but also the ecology of the bay, get the people connected to the projects. It's easy when you're on the land and you're walking through beautiful restored trees and what have you, but underwater still remains a challenge to get everybody in there. So maybe just throw them off the bridge when they're walking across the bridge and let them look underwater. But it is something that we've done. I have to say, after being there for a long time, it's the one thing that the estuary programs do pretty well, is to engage the public in these projects.
Well, it's a good way to launch into our last participation question. Unfortunately, one of the options is have you jumped off a bridge?
I've jumped off many bridges.
Right. But, a lot of folks here are professionals, but I'm curious in just your private life, which of these things have you done to participate in urban ecology? Read educational displays, use your smartphone to interact with particular kinds of areas, volunteer for habitat restoration or trash pickups, or have you actually done some citizen science or public participation where you've actually collected some data for the purposes of advancing an ecological research question? So a lot of people who are interested, a lot of people who can do a lot of reading, but hopefully more and more opportunities from our organizations to get involved in these other kinds of ways, because it certainly makes the science better. And there's a great opportunity for feedback to result in better designs, better policies, better urban landscapes for ourselves, but also for the natural environment that we're so closely embedded with. So I think this is a good occasion to wrap things up and invite any specific questions that folks in the audience might have. That'll work.
Yes.
Where are some good places to snorkel in the bay or jump off a bridge?
So, and I'll just repeat this for anybody who didn't hear it. Good places to snorkel or jump off of a bridge, in Sarasota Bay specifically.
I recommend short bridges. Don't start with the tall ones. Go to the little ones first and work your way up. Well, snorkeling in the bay, I was just talking with a woman who I met at lunchtime who actually went out with the Tampa Bay program, which initiated a snorkeling program. They went off Emerson Point up in Manatee County on the north side of the Manatee River, and I've had the pleasure of snorkeling that particular part of the bay, even though it's up in South Tampa Bay. It's easy to get to, and it has some exquisite grass flats there, relatively shallow water, clean sandy bottom, usually good visibility, and there's a lot to see there as well. Probably the most famous snorkeling place in our watershed is Point of Rocks on Siesta Key. It's at the south end of the public beach, the public Crescent Beach. It's some challenging parking, I understand, to get there, but that's a place where a lot of people go to snorkel because it's a natural rock outcropping with lots of tropical like fish and other demersal fish and soft corals and algae that grow on the rocks, so it's kind of colorful as well. So that's a good place to go as well.
Well, we've got some great questions up here, and hopefully you all can get in touch with us to follow up individually. But there's so much collective expertise in the audience. This is certainly just a way to start a community-based conversation. So it's a good time for us to get off the stage and move the conversation out there.
Right.
Yeah.